all over Syria. And that was when Syria was hot. It was everybody wanted to go. And so I went. And I would just be very interested now how the daily life is. The boutique hotels, which were flourishing, are they still going? And the damage, I've gone online to see the damage in the souks and Croque de Chevalier. Could you give a little update as to the daily life and the damage to the historical monuments?
Well,
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. I wish I could give you an update about Damascus, but I haven't been able to go there for a long time, and that's a great regret. I wish that I could. So I can't speak about the suit in Damascus. I haven't seen it. If I haven't seen it, I can't tell you about it. But I can tell you about the situation in the north. I mean, the level of devastation is incredible in cities like Aleppo and in many small towns and villages. There is, in some areas, there is no building that is unscathed. Many are shorn open. It's like they're just sliced open. The rubble pours out into the streets. There are some areas where there's ankle-high rubble, and they just remove it enough so that cars can pass. There are electricity blackouts, like I said. There are some groups that are providing electricity, and they tend to be more Islamist militias as well that are trying to provide basic services. Electricity shortages, water shortages. Many farmers haven't been able to plant their crops, especially in, it's a very rich, Syria is a very rich agricultural country. Many farmers haven't been able to plant their crops. Rampant inflation in the markets. There are people who, there's a lot of internal displacement. There are people who have, there are families now that have taken in extended families, that are taking in other families. It's a really, really dire situation for civilians. There are many, many millions of children who haven't been to school for years as well. Of course, the vaccination issue is a big thing, because in areas that have fallen out of government control, there is no vaccination. People can't vaccinate their children in these places, because a lot of these international aid organizations only deal with governments. Of course, in these areas there is no government, hence there are problems with things like that. With hospitals, there are a lot of, in rebel-held areas, a lot of the hospitals have been hit. People have to rely on field clinics, which are often insufficiently supplied. I have seen children being operated on without anesthetic in lots of places. So it's we're talking
massive,
really massive changes to a country that was that used to export its agricultural produce around the region, to a country that is water rich, to a country that is rich in so many different ways, and you see the complete destruction of these areas and the lives and the livelihoods as well.
Do you know just about the boutique hotels in Aleppo, I'm thinking?
Oh, Aleppo is, I mean, the suit has been hit. There have been fires. The looting as well. Lots of things have been looted. It's a very dire situation.
Yes, please, up front here.
A little more, perhaps, about...
Can you just say, identify...
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Marianne Stein. I'm with the Mariah Fund. You said that the international aid agencies cannot work in the non-government. They have to work with the government. So
that's my understanding.
Are any of them reaching into the areas that are rebel held?
But I did see some reports that that there were attempts to get some vaccinations down in Deir ez-Zor in the east, but I can't. I'd have to check that.
I had understood that some local aid agencies were getting supplies and assistance somehow from outside, and I just wondered if you knew anything about that.
Well, I mean, there are Syrian NGOs, of course, that are trying to fundraise and to get assistance and to do what they can, but the need is absolutely massive. I mean, we're talking about more than 6 million people who are either refugees or internally displaced. This is not something that a local Syrian NGO can deal with. This is a huge, I think the UN said that it was one of the biggest
It is the biggest.
The biggest, if not the biggest one. So.
worst humanitarian disaster in the modern era. But just to sort of take that line of questioning just a bit further, I mean, have you witnessed aid deliveries, the food baskets, the blankets?
The only deliveries I have seen are deliveries that were literally carried on the backs of Syrians who carried them into their own country. I haven't seen anybody else assisting them.
Okay, I'm going to take some questions back here. Woman in the red.
Sana, Syrian Nation Coalition. Actually, like, I came recently from Syria, like 5 months ago. And I wasn't in the north side. I was like in Damascus and like regime sites area. So like when you're talking about the north side and you're talking about the Islamic groups and like civil activists, I missed the part about Hezbollah fighters and Iran's fighters. Like they are really exist in the north and like they are really part of this war in the north. So I would like to know, what did you see about from them?
I haven't seen any Hezbollah fighters, but of course, you know, the foreign fighters are on both sides. They're assisting the rebels, but we also have Hezbollah very openly fighting with the regime. We also have reports about Iranians, about Iraqi Shias, about others as well who are fighting for the regime. So, I mean, you know, Syria is a proxy battle. It's a proxy war, and it is drawing in foreigners from all different areas on both sides, definitely.
In the back.
Hi, I'm Mark Seibel with McClatchy Newspapers. I'm curious about the comment when you were with the Nusra escorts, what they said, you know, if ISIS shows up, we really can't protect you. What were they telling you? Why was that? And then let me ask another question, which is regarding ISIS. There's a theory, I'm sure you've heard it, that ISIS is really working with the regime and doing the regime's work. I wonder what you think about that, and I wonder if you have any insight into why ISIS aggressively moved against the FSA in a place like Assaz.
Okay, so in April of this year, the leader of the Islamic State of Iraq in Sham, the Islamic State of Iraq, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who's an Iraqi, announced that his organization was the parent organization of Jabhat al-Nusra, and he said that the two would merge and that they would form the Islamic State of Iraq in Sham. A few days later, the leader of al-Nusra, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, who was a Syrian, rejected this. He said, we didn't know about this declaration before it was made. We reject it and we will remain Jabhat al-Nusra. Al-Qaeda Central, if you like, the leader of Al-Qaeda Central, Ayman al-Zawahiri, weighed in, and he said that the two groups should remain separate. His ruling was ignored by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. So when this happened in April, I know guys in Jabhat al-Nusra who didn't know which way to go. They started saying, do we go with Baghdadi, do we go with Jolani? Many of the hardcore foreign elements went with ISIS. So by default, Jabhat al-Nusra became more Syrian. There have been differences. You know, Jabhat al-Nusra was always careful not to antagonize the communities in which it based itself. It seemed to have learned the lessons of Iraq, and it didn't want to, you know, they would suggest the hijab, for example. They would suggest certain means to dress, especially for women, but they wouldn't impose it. ISIS is a very different creature. They very aggressively antagonize the local populations, both the military units that are present, including Jabhat al-Nusra in some areas, as well as civilians. They are basically the Islamic State of Iraq, and they're doing everything that that group did in Iraq. So in some areas, like in Raqqa, for example, the Islamic State of Iraq and Jabhat al-Nusra, the animosity is such that the Islamic State kidnapped the emir of Jabhat al-Nusra in that city. So, I mean, you know, that's the level of animosity in some areas. Of course, that differs. In other areas, they work together quite happily. So it's a very localized thing. That's the other thing about the Syrian war, is that, you know, I'm loath to sort of generalize about it because I don't think that you can. It's very localized. The dynamics are very different in different areas. And that's something that we also have to keep in mind. And I can't remember if I answered all your questions or if there was something else.
I mean, describing a relationship with ISIS that didn't permit them to respond should they attempt to kidnap you?
That was very particular. I was in the countryside of Latakia, and I have never seen that many foreign fighters there, and I've been in just about everywhere except for a couple of places. They were really drawn to that battle. I saw units that were comprised solely of Chechens. There were men from many different places, so that was a very particular kind of dynamic in that area. So in that area, those Jabhat al-Nusra guys had that relationship with the elements of ISIS. It's very particular. It depends.
Now, this was in the last time you were in Syria, right, in August. And you're saying that that was particular to Latakia. Are we sure it's not something similar in other areas?
No, I mean, it is like in Raqqa. It's the same sort of thing in some parts of Aleppo. It's a, so it depends. It really does depend on where you are. So I won't generalize and say this is the situation everywhere, because it's not the case.
But what about ISIS doing the work of the regime?
Oh, yes, sorry. You know, when Jabhat al-Nusra was first formed, the same allegations were made that Jabhat al-Nusra is part of the regime, or it's part of regime propaganda, or it plays into regime propaganda, and certainly the same claims have been made of ISIS. And you know, this is something that comes up. This has come up before. I will tell you that in Raqqa, for example, everybody knows where the ISIS headquarters are. Quite clear. They're in the governorate, and they're in the former governor's mansion. Oddly enough, those two places haven't been hit in all the airstrikes on the city.
Okay. I think, Ryan, did you have a question? Right here up front.
I was wondering if you could talk more about the structure of ISIS, how